Over the Garden Wall is probably too popular now to consider the hidden gem of Cartoon Network. The show came out in 2014 and is based on an animated short called Tome of the Unknown from 2013, which was also written by Patrick McHale. Over the Garden Wall has never been unpopular, but it's certainly increased in its popularity in more recent years. Part of what makes the show so impactful is its short duration. Even shorter animations are 12 decent-length episodes, but Over the Garden Wall consists of 10 episodes at about 11 minutes each. Essentially, this series could be, and usually is, viewed in one sitting, like a movie. Even then, it contains as much content as shows that are twice its length. Because Over the Garden Wall has to fit its entire plot in a shorter time span, it relies heavily on the suspension of disbelief, or the intentional avoidance of critical thinking or logic in examining something unreal or impossible in reality, such as a work of speculative fiction, in order to believe it for the sake of enjoyment. I Google definitions because who does it better than the internet? This approach is what allows the twist of Wirt and Greg being from a modern era to surprise the viewers while also feeling well earned. The show never avoids talking about what home is to the boys. In fact, they often allude to this reveal. Greg is even seen throwing his Halloween candy from his pockets in the first episode, but because of how surreal this world around them seems, the audience doesn't think too hard about it. Wirt often comments on how weird the places they come across are, but viewers think these locations are weird not just to us, but in this fantasy-driven universe. Even the talking bluebird finds the towns our heroes come across to be strange. It's safe to say that Wirt and Greg don't react as drastically to the antics of the unknown as most children from our world would, but it's not that they don't react at all. The show tends to be weirdly dry amongst its randomness, and after a while, the brothers accept everything as is. They suspend their own disbelief, and subsequently the viewers suspend theirs. Even the relationship between the unknown and the real world, which is essentially an animated version of ours, is up for debate. The show alludes to the unknown being an interpretation of, or at least a metaphor for, the afterlife, but some fans think it truly is another land altogether. It's hard to argue towards the "it was all in your head" trope, considering the frog, Jason Funderburker, still has the cursed bell inside of him when the boys are in the hospital. It's also much harder to argue towards it being a shared hallucination rather than a genuine trip to Over the Garden Wall. Over the Garden Wall is able to support its fast-paced plot and fantastical world-building mostly through its music. While less is technically being explained through dialogue, characters are able to be more direct without their exchanges sounding unnatural or worse, telly rather than showy. Take, for example, one of the best songs in the series, A Courting Song, which takes place in episode 4. The different townsfolk in the tavern start singing about what they do, insisting Wirt tells them who he is, unsatisfied with just his name. When Wirt asks for directions to Adelaide's house, the tavern people are confused and mistake him as a young lover, which, once we learn more details about Wirt's life at home, isn't far from the truth. The kid's a romantic. It would be easy for Wirt to explain his situation via dialogue, but it would take much longer and fail to express just how uncertain Wirt is of himself. Everyone else's lines are rehearsed. They know who they are. Whenever Greg is meant to sing throughout the series, the words come to him with more ease because he is more self-assured and easygoing than Wirt. In the tavern, Wirt struggles to weave his tale. He explains how he and Greg are related and that they're trying to get home, but the townspeople are the ones who label him a pilgrim on a journey. They sing their parts and sing Wirt's for him. This not only supports Beatrice's idea that Wirt is a bit of a pushover at first, but that Wirt doesn't have a song within him quite like Greg does. I also love the voice casting for the main villain, the Beast, as well as the ominous story that surrounds him. While I tend to favor villains with a certain brand of voice casting, the Ron Perlmans, the Mark Hamills, the Kevin Michael Richardsons, I'm blown away when a new approach like this is taken. To have the villain barely be shown and to have him prance through the woods tra-la-la-la-ing with the woodsman doing all of his work, and to make the Beast so terrifying because of that, it just goes to show how what is unknown in Over the Garden Wall is much scarier than what is known. Pottsfield reads like a horror setting at first, but it's just a town where the dead don pumpkins and have a big party. The protagonists are never in any real danger when they visit. However, it appears that in episodes like this, or in The Ringing of the Bell, they are in the most physical danger. The Beast, however, doesn't touch Wirt or Greg or the woodsman. He manipulates them. And in this show, it makes sense that the biggest fights would be the mental in lieu of the physical. This is why a villain whose menacingness comes from his mind and ambiguity works better with this show than someone scary in a more upfront sense. The Beast tricks people into bringing their own deaths, which is infinitely scarier than the alternative. It's the same reason apathy are my favorite Grimm and Ruby. Something about fading away slowly scares me much more than being, I don't know, stabbed or something. Even the woodsman learns his entire fight with the beast was for nothing, as he burned the lantern not for the soul of his daughter, but for the beast's life force. This reveal shows that even the fates of the beast's enemies depend on what the victim is willing to believe. So Over the Garden Wall uses the suspension of disbelief from its premise, plot, music, and villain, but what's the point? It isn't impossible to take time and set rules to a world, the power scaling, the stakes, the impact. It's very possible. However, to truly cement rules, it takes more than just 10, 11-minute episodes. It takes a lot of effort, repetition, and demonstration. Over the Garden Wall prides itself on its whimsical tone, though, and to stretch out a show with its vibe would probably be a cardinal sin. Instead, the show relies on the viewer to fill in the gaps, or ignore the gaps altogether. Technically, I finished the show with hundreds of unanswered questions, but I'm content to leave it that way. I don't want answers because answers pull the experience closer to reality, and that's not what I want from a show like this. I love that the series adds the scenes from the real world towards the end. The mundane tale of Wirt going to a high school football game, trying to talk to his crush, then feeling uncomfortable at social gatherings, is a world away from intertwining mansions, a frog band, and kids turning into trees. Even though Wirt and Greg's goal is to find a way home, Wirt's endgame has always been mustering the courage to talk to Sarah, which is such a hilariously simple goal in a show as magical as this. Even in the unknown, there are places further from even that reality. The absolute trip that is Greg visiting that cloud city with the welcoming committees feels like the most bizarre dream sequence ever, and it kind of is. But it's a scene nearing the big reveal that Wirt and Greg are from a world like our own. This makes episode 9 even more shocking. Over the Garden Wall relies on the audience forgetting the usual rules they would set for a series. We don't judge what it fails to explain. We don't critique what we can't comprehend. We don't fear much beyond our heroes disappearing in some corner of an arguably non-existent dimension. The very reasons Over the Garden Wall is good are the same reasons we may avoid another show, all because this series does what it does with intent, and I think that's the most important part.
We already stole a horse.
Hey, guys.
No, we didn't. Fred's a talking horse. He can do whatever he wants.
I want to steal.